Now, if you ask the average person about Tupac today, they'll probably picture the same version of him. The gangster rapper, bandana around his head, a confrontational presence, the guy who always seemed like he was ready for war. But the more you actually look into his life, not the stories that were told about him, the actual documented record, the more that image starts to fall apart. Because before the headlines, before the controversies, before the myth that formed around him, Tupac Shakur was something most people never talk about, a performing arts student, studying theater, poetry, and ballet. So the real question is, who was Tupac before the myth eventually took over? On June 16, 1971, a child named Lassane Parrish Crooks was born in New York City. But that name wouldn't last long. By the time he was a toddler, his mother made a decision that would permanently change how the world would know him. She renamed him Tupac Amaru Shakur, and the name change wasn't random. Tupac Amaru was the name of a revolutionary leader in Peru who led a major rebellion against the Spanish Empire in the late 1700s and was eventually executed for it. His mother, Afeni Shakur, later explained why she chose that name. She wanted her son to grow up understanding that he came from a tradition of resistance, that his identity was connected to something bigger than just the neighborhood he was born into. In her words, she wanted him to know he was a part of a global culture of revolutionary people. And to understand why she was thinking that way, you have to understand who Tupac's mother actually was. His mother, Afeni Shakur, was a member of the Black Panther Party, a revolutionary political organization that emerged in the 1960s to fight police brutality and push for political power in black communities.
The Black Panther Party has attracted strong national support from radicals and intellectuals, black and white.
In 1969, Afeni Shakur was arrested along with more than 20 other members of the group in what became known as the Panther 21 case, a major conspiracy trial where prosecutors accused them of plotting attacks across New York City. Afeni took charge of her own defense and represented herself in court. After a lengthy trial, she was acquitted of all charges. So from the very beginning, Tupac wasn't being raised in an ordinary household. The household he grew up in was shaped by political conviction, legal conflict, and a mother who had already faced down the state head on and won. Later, Afeni married Mutulu Shakur, who was also connected to black liberation activism. So that was the world Pac was born into, not the street corner, not the rap industry, a political household in a city still dealing with poverty, unrest, and the aftershocks of the civil rights era. And yet, that's almost never where most people start the story. Now, Pac's early life was anything but stable. Over the next few years, his family moved around constantly, and money was often tight. For long stretches of time, his mother Afeni was raising Pac and his sister mostly on her own. And while those kinds of struggles aren't unusual for a lot of families, in Tupac's case, they would shape the person he eventually became. By the mid-1980s, the family had relocated to Baltimore, Maryland, and this move would end up becoming one of the most important chapters in Tupac's early life. By the mid-80s, Tupac had already lived through a lot of things. He had grown up around political activism, his family had struggled financially, and they had moved around constantly. And depending on which part of Tupac's life people focus on, they end up with a completely different picture of who he was. For some people, Tupac will always be the militant voice speaking out against injustice. For others, he's the aggressive rap icon from the mid-1990s. But there's another version of Tupac that almost never gets talked about, and it might be one of the most important chapters in understanding who he really was. As a teenager, Tupac enrolled at the Baltimore School for the Arts, a public performing arts high school. And this is something a lot of people don't realize about his story. Long before the headlines and controversies that would later surround him, Pac was actually a performing arts student studying acting, poetry, jazz, and ballet, which is probably the last place most people imagine Tupac being as a teenager. And while Tupac was at the Baltimore School for the Arts, he wasn't just passing through. He took the work there seriously, studying acting, writing poetry, and performing in theater productions. It was also during this time that he formed one of the closest friendships of his early life with a fellow student named Jada Pinkett, years before either of them became famous. So before the albums, before the mythology, before any of that stuff happened that eventually formed all these perceptions around him, here was a young Tupac studying art, writing poetry, and trying to figure out who he wanted to become. And this part of Tupac's story is so interesting to me, and it's always been so interesting to me, because it's not the version of him most people talk about. When people bring up Tupac today, they usually jump straight to the bandana, the interviews, the controversies, the larger-than-life image that came later. But years before that image existed, he was a teenager at an art school, learning how to express himself through acting, poetry, and performance. And I think that raises an interesting question. How come this version of Tupac almost, doesn't exist in most people's minds? Like, this part of his story isn't talked about enough. The narrative usually begins with the gangsta rapper instead of the young artist who was clearly trying to understand himself and the world around him through art. Because when you look at the full picture, those two versions of Tupac aren't separate people. They're the same person, just at different stages of his life. By the late 1980s, Tupac and his family moved again, this time to Marin City, California. And this move would end up changing the direction of his life. Marin City was nothing like the performing arts environment he had come from in Baltimore. The streets were rougher, life was harder, and at the same time, his mother Afeni had begun struggling with serious crack addiction, something Tupac would later talk openly about in his music. For a young Tupac, it was another major shift, another environment, another reality. But despite everything changing around him, one thing never really left him: his love for music and poetry. Around this time, Pac connected with a mentor named Layla Steinberg.
He was the sloppiest, messiest person I've ever lived with. And dirty. He would never want to wash clothes. He'd want to buy new clothes so he wouldn't have to clean up and wash stuff.
Who hosted poetry workshops where he began performing and developing his writing. Many of the poems he wrote during this period would later be collected and published in the book The Rose That Grew from the Concrete, and that would eventually lead him to the opportunity that changed everything. Because Tupac didn't enter the rap industry the way most people think he did. He didn't start as a star. In 1990, Tupac joined the Bay Area rap group Digital Underground, not as a rapper, as a roadie and dancer. The same Tupac would later become one of the most intense voices in hip-hop. Actually started his career dancing on stage for a group best known for a kind of goofy song called the Humpty Dance. But that opportunity would open a lot of doors for him. In 1991, Tupac made his first official appearance on a song from the group called Same Song, and later that same year, he released his debut solo album, Tupacalypse Now. And almost immediately, people realized this wasn't just another rapper entering the scene. By 1992, Tupac Shakur was starting to attract attention across the industry and the country. But not all that attention was positive.
A state trooper was killed by a man who says he may have been motivated to shoot by a song on the album Tupacalypse Now.
That year, a teenager in Texas by the name of Ronald Ray Howard was arrested after shooting and killing a state trooper during a traffic stop. During the case, Howard said he had been listening to Tupac's album Tupacalypse Now around the time of the shooting, and his defense later argued that the music may have influenced him to do what he did. However, the argument didn't work in court, and Howard was later convicted of murder and sentenced to death. The case sparked a national controversy about rap music and violence, and suddenly Tupac found himself at the center of that debate. And around that same time, U.S. Vice President Dan Quayle publicly condemned Tupac's album, arguing that the record had no place in American culture.
There is absolutely no reason for a record like this to be published by a responsible corporation.
The vice president's latest attack on the entertainment industry is aimed at rap lyrics. He's responding to a murder in Texas where a state trooper was killed by a man who says he may have been motivated to shoot by a song on the album Tupacalypse Now. Mr. Quayle wants the record taken off shelves.
Today, I am suggesting that Time Warner's subsidiary, Interscope Records, withdraw this record. It has no place in our society.
I was raised in this society, so there's no way you can expect me to be a perfect person. I'm going to do what I'm going to do. That's how I feel. I'm going to do whatever I like. I'm not a role model or nothing.
And while the controversy was growing, Tupac's career itself was also expanding beyond music. In 1992, he appeared in the film Juice, playing the character Bishop. Over the next year, Tupac's career continued to grow, and on February 16, 1993, he released his second album, Strictly for My Niggas. One of the most notable songs from the project was Keep Your Head Up, a track that spoke directly about poverty, inequality, and the treatment of women. That same year, he also starred alongside Janet Jackson in the film Poetic Justice, further establishing himself as both a musician and an actor. But as Tupac's fame was continuing to rise, controversy was beginning to follow Pac closely wherever he went. On October 31st, 1993, Tupac was arrested at his hotel in Atlanta after being accused of shooting 2 off-duty police officers.
Tupac Shakur himself has been accused of shooting 2 police officers in Atlanta.
He's keeping every police department in the country busy.
Tupac Shakur pleaded innocent Wednesday in Atlanta to aggravated assault charges. He was arrested for allegedly shooting and wounding 2 off-duty police officers after an argument. One of the officers is also charged in the case.
When that story hit the media, it sounded exactly like what most people already believed about him: a violent rapper shooting cops in the street.
They got out with guns. They were hollering and screaming, threatening my wife, threatening my brother and me. I pulled the gun to protect, hopefully to save our lives.
You've been charged with shooting 2 off-duty police officers. There's a sexual assault charge against you, sir. Do you worry about the message this might send out to the people who buy your music?
No, my people that buy my music should understand that we have a wonderful judicial system in this country and it works. And I have to go through the system just like everybody else. I've only been charged. I've not been convicted of any crime. So Merry Christmas to everybody. Merry Christmas to the press. I appreciate the present you've given me for giving me a fair trial and a fair shot at justice. I thank you from the bottom of my heart for just destroying everything I worked for the past 22 years.
According to the initial police report, the incident began after 2 cars carrying Tupac and his associates nearly struck the officers and their wives as they crossed the street. Tupac was eventually charged with 2 counts of aggravated assault and released on a bond shortly after. Now, from the beginning, there were 2 very different versions of what happened that night. According to Pac, the 2 men were intoxicated and had been harassing a black motorist, and Pac stepped in to defend him. However, according to the officers, who were brothers, Tupac escalated the situation and opened fire. Now, as the case moved forward, more details started to tell the full truth about what really happened that night, and testimony revealed that the gun one of the officers pulled had previously been seized as evidence and had gone missing from an evidence locker. So now the situation wasn't just about a street altercation anymore. It raised serious questions about the officers themselves, and at that point, the story people thought they understood didn't look so convincing anymore. Eventually, the charges against Tupac Shakur were dropped, but by that point, the damage to his public image had already been done, because to the public, it wasn't these charges got dropped, it was Tupac shot 2 cops, and that's the only part most people even know. Then, just 1 month later, another legal case emerged.
Shakur is charged with assaulting a 20-year-old woman.
On November 18, 1993, a woman accused Tupac and several other men of sexually assaulting her in a New York hotel room. The case moved forward through the legal system and would remain unresolved for more than a year.
But no matter what happens, innocent or guilty, my life is ruined. Because when they say, whatever they say in this verdict, y'all not going to make it front page news. It won't be big, no matter what. All that you want to hear is that he's guilty, he's in jail, the reign of terror is over, the outlaw's gone. That's what they want to do. So, and the way the world is today, a woman can say anything about a man and I'm guilty until proven, you know what I'm saying? It's like I don't even have a chance. Everybody already made me guilty. My career's already going this way.
Did she lie?
Of course she lied.
And by the end of 1993, Tupac's public image had become increasingly complicated. On one hand, he was gaining recognition as a successful rapper and a promising actor, but on the other hand, legal battles and controversy were following him wherever he went. And this is where Tupac's story starts to become harder to simplify, because at the same time he was releasing songs like Keep Your Head Up, openly speaking about respecting women and addressing the struggles going on in the black community. These allegations were clouding his image, so there was a lot of different things going on at the same time, and those 2 realities would exist side by side. And by the end of 1993, it was clear that Tupac's life was entering a much more turbulent chapter. By the way, if you find this video interesting, don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss anything that I drop. Because 1994 is where everything falls apart. By the start of 1994, Tupac was only 22 years old. His career was taking off, 2 albums out, multiple films, and Hollywood was starting to take him seriously as an actor. But behind the scenes, things were starting to unravel. It started with the Allen Hughes situation. Allen Hughes was one of the directors of Menace to Society, a classic film that followed a young man in South Central Los Angeles trying to escape a life of violence before it consumed him. For anyone who doesn't know, Tupac had actually been cast in the film to play a character named Sharif, a former gang member turned Muslim. But Pac had a problem with that because his thing was, how does a gang member just become Muslim with no explanation? Where's the backstory?
Because I ain't gonna play no gangbanger who's a Muslim. There ain't no such thing. I refuse to play parts that don't exist.
It didn't feel authentic to Pac, and essentially he just wanted a backstory so the audience, the people watching the movie, would understand how his character got to that point. Pac wasn't willing to just go along with it, and so, like the outspoken guy he was, he pushed back on Allen Hughes about it. Things got heated, and eventually, Tupac was fired from the film. However, months later, the situation turned physical when Hughes was attacked on a separate music video set by Pac and his entourage. Hughes pressed charges, Tupac was convicted of assault and battery, and sentenced to 15 days in jail. At the same time, his career kept moving. In March 1994, he appeared in Above the Rim, still building his reputation as both a rapper and an actor, but something had already started to shift. The image around Pac wasn't just a talented artist anymore, it was becoming something else. Later that year, Tupac released the project Thug Life Volume 1 with his group Thug Life. And around this time, the phrase Thug Life which Tupac had tatted across his stomach, was becoming central to the image he presented to the world. But by the end of 1994, the pressure around Tupac had reached a breaking point. Legal trouble, industry tensions, and a growing spotlight that followed him wherever he went. And on the night of November 30, 1994, everything finally collided.
Shortly after midnight, 12:25 a.m. on Wednesday morning,
The night he was shot in the lobby of Quad Studios.
Tupac Shakur was shot 5 times in the lobby of this Manhattan building right behind me. The gunmen, who remain at large, also made off with $40,000 worth of jewelry.
He was shot numerous times, at least twice in the head.
He was grazed by 2 shots to the head and wounded in the thigh, hand, and groin.
That night, Tupac Shakur walked into Quad Recording Studios in Midtown Manhattan, a professional recording studio in New York. But within seconds, everything changed. As Tupac entered the lobby, he was confronted by multiple armed men. They approached him at gunpoint, beat him, and robbed him. During the attack, Pac was shot 5 times. Within minutes, he was rushed to the hospital and miraculously survived. But the shooting immediately raised questions. Who set him up? Who knew he would be there? Those questions would follow Tupac for the rest of his life. Less than 2 days later, while Tupac was still recovering from the gunshot wounds, a jury reached a verdict in his criminal trial. On December 1st and 2nd, 1994, Tupac Shakur was found guilty of 2 counts of first-degree sexual abuse involving non-consensual sexual contact. He was acquitted of the more serious sodomy charges and also cleared of weapons charges. But the conviction still carried serious consequences. And in the public eye, something strange happened. 2 completely separate events, the shooting and the trial, became fused into one narrative. Within the span of 48 hours, Tupac Shakur had been shot 5 times and convicted in a criminal case. Almost overnight, the image of Pac began to change. The politically outspoken rapper, the promising actor, was now becoming something else in the public imagination, more dangerous, more controversial. Whether that transformation came from Tupac himself or from the way the world now saw him is still debated today. On February 8, 1995, Tupac Shakur was sentenced to 1.5 to 4.5 years in prison. He was sent to Clinton Correctional Facility in New York. But even behind bars, Tupac continued creating. Just a month later, on March 14, 1995, his 3rd album was released. The album was called Me Against the World, and it debuted at number 1 on the Billboard charts. One of the most powerful songs on the album was Dear Mama, a deeply personal tribute to his mother, Afeni, a woman who had raised him through poverty, activism, addiction, and instability. It was vulnerable, honest, emotional, and it didn't fit neatly into the gangster rapper image that was starting to define him. But while Tupac sat in prison, the hip-hop industry itself was beginning to divide. In August 1995, at the Source Awards, Death Row Records executive Suge Knight took the stage and publicly mocked Bad Boy Records. The moment became one of the most famous scenes in hip-hop history because it helped ignite what would soon be known as the East Coast versus West Coast rivalry. And Tupac was still sitting in prison while all this unfolded, until October 12, 1995, when Death Row Records executive Suge Knight and Tupac came to an agreement that he would pay his $1.4 million bail if he signed with Death Row, which Pac agreed to. And after roughly 8 months in prison, Tupac walked free. In February 1996, Tupac released what would become one of the most successful albums in hip-hop history, All Eyes on Me, a massive double album that signaled Tupac's return to the spotlight. The album was aggressive, defiant, larger than life, and just a few months later, Tupac released one of the most infamous diss tracks ever recorded, a song that directly targeted several figures in the rap industry and escalated tensions in the East Coast-West Coast feud. At the same time, Tupac still hadn't abandoned acting. He appeared in films like Bullet and Gridlock, continuing the acting career he had started years earlier. But by this point, the pressure surrounding Tupac's life had reached an entirely different level. Then came September 7th, 1996. That night, Tupac attended a Mike Tyson fight at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. After the fight, an altercation broke out inside the casino. Later that evening, while riding in a car on the Las Vegas Strip, another car pulled up alongside him. Gunfire erupted. Tupac Shakur was hit multiple times. He was rushed to the hospital, and 6 days later, on September 13, 1996, Tupac Amar Shakur died. He was 25 years old.
Rap star Tupac Shakur died last night after a brief life in a rough business. He was 25.
Less than 2 months later, his final recorded album was released under the name Machiavelli. Over time, Tupac Shakur became larger than life. He became a symbol. But when we look closely at the actual record of his life, the story is far more complicated. One of the biggest myths about Tupac was that he was simply a gangster rapper from the streets, but the record shows he was a performing arts student who studied acting, poetry, jazz, and ballet. The myth also says that his music was only about violence, but his catalog includes songs about social inequality, poverty, and the struggles faced by women. The headlines that were pushed about his character was largely sensationalism as well, like the SA case where he was never technically convicted of rape. The legal record shows he was convicted of first-degree sexual abuse and acquitted of the most serious accusations and charges. And this is connected to the myth, which says Tupac fully embraced the gangster rapper image, when he really didn't. Pac always fought back against how the media tried to box him in as nothing but a thug, especially in interviews after getting out of prison. Tupac was never just one thing. He was the son of a political activist, a performing arts student, a poet, and within a few years had the Vice President of the United States criticizing his music. He was also someone who lived through real violence, legal battles, fame, and enormous pressure, all before the age of 25. The same person who wrote Dear Mama also recorded Hit 'Em Up, and these weren't contradictions, these were all part of the same person. He was clearly a very complex person, someone who lived a life most people can't even imagine. Think about how much he actually went through, and just being 25 years old, Pac really lived a life most 50-year-olds can't say they lived. And he always struck me as an extremely dynamic person. Like he had all these different sides to him. All of those sides were existent inside one person at the same time. I think he understood that in order to make the biggest impact, he had to capture attention. And part of that was leaning into the gangsta image the world responded to. And honestly, that's what makes it bittersweet. Because the world only knows one version of Tupac. The one that sold records, the one that made the headlines, the one that fit neatly into a box people already had ready for him. I always imagined Tupac being more of other things to the world, how the world actually embraced these other sides of him, which is something rapper Jeezy made a point about.
Tupac was in the theater, he was in the poetry, he was in the acting, he was in the activism, he was in so many different things, but we just respected his music. We didn't see what a gift he was because we were so caught up in his thugging.
And Jeezy's right, because when you look at the full timeline, you start to wonder what the trajectory looks like if things had gone differently, if the industry pressure had been different, if the feuds hadn't escalated the way they did. Although he connected with so many people, I think Pac was for sure misunderstood. He didn't have this manufactured cookie-cutter rags to riches story you often see in hip-hop. He really came from the bottom, but he also came from somewhere most people don't associate with him at all. His life was a collision of art, politics, fame, and chaos. And when people talk about him now, they usually remember the gangsta image that made him known to the world. But underneath that, he was a much more complicated human being. The version most people think they know was only part of the story. If you made it this far, I appreciate you. Drop a little like on this video and subscribe if you're new here. My name is BlackySpeakz. Nice to meet you guys. Thank you for being here. I'm curious what you think about this whole Tupac conversation. Hopefully you learned something new about him. You guys let me know in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace. I'm out.